Today we are going to see this first module on perception, decision making and context. Why these three things are together? The reason is that the importance of context is one of the key driving mechanisms for both perception and decision making. So it's a key driving mechanism for basic cognitive functions like perceiving the world around us, so something really basic that we do in everyday life, and also for more advanced cognitive functions like decision making, which is something that we see as something uniquely human. The two key messages of this module are that context is something that we need to consider whenever we have to decide what we have in front of us. So context, the meaning of context drives our perception. Our perception is not a passive registration of reality. The second key message is that the same mechanism is also true for decision making. So whenever we have to make a decision, again, we rely on some of the tricks, some of the mechanisms, some of the things we do that we use when we are just looking at something. So let me start with some visual illusions. In this image you see two tiles and they are gray. Can you tell me by a show of hands if which one of the two is darker? Do you think that is this one darker than this one? Raise your hand if you think it is darker. So we all agree about that. I will modify this image. I will show you that the reality is not really like that. These two tiles, they have the same shade of gray. We only see them differently. I have a similar illusion where we have more or less the same mechanism. So we have two tiles in this chessboard, A and B. Do you see them as different? Okay. We have someone that is not fully convinced, but because now you know that there is a trick behind that. And in fact, there is a trick, and it's like the previous one. So if I show these two gray bars, we see that the two tiles have the same color. The thing here, as in the previous image, is that we see colors considering the big picture, the context. So in this case, for instance, we know that we have a chessboard in front of us. A chessboard is black and white. In this case, we have a shadow, and this B tile is a white tile in shadow. So our brain makes us see this tile as white because we see the context that surrounds the tile. Let's see a second example of these visual illusions. In this case, you have some shapes on the screen. Do you recognize anything? Can you see anything on the screen? So I will just add these three bars in front of the shapes that you have just seen, and then you will see the meaning of what you have in front of us. So this is the first array of shapes that you saw before. Let me add the three bars. What do you see now?
It's a cube.
So it's a cube behind the three bars, partially hidden by three bars. So what we are seeing here is that we don't take in the individual pieces of information in isolation. We need to see the whole configuration. We need to see the big picture in order to understand what we have in front of us. In this case, our brain is making us see something that is not there. I mean, there is no cube. There is no cube in this image. What our brain is doing is filling the gaps in order for us to understand what we have in front of us. And this mechanism goes from the big picture to the details, from the forest to the trees. That's also the title of a famous academic paper, Forest Before the Trees. So the key message behind this first part of this module is that perception is more than sensory registration. This is another very famous illusion where we see one white triangle hiding a second one on top of three circles. And if you look at the single elements, there is nothing like that in this image. It's simply something that we add to perception. So the message is that the meaning depends on the big picture. What do you see here?
Almost a square.
Almost a square. Here, we start to see that there is a glass, a mirror, something that is broken. And we start to see even the materiality of the shape. Here, it's no longer glass, it's no longer mirror. I mean, it's something that has been crunched. So we also see the material. Even this information is not in the picture. We can also see movement, for instance, here. So there is a chessboard. We see that the chessboard is vertical and that the different tiles are actually cubes that are crumbling to the ground. So we are able to see also the different movements, I mean, information that is not that, the materiality, even if it is a black and white, just a line. So meaning depends on the big picture, and we take this for granted. We think that this is something that happens, and it's normal, it's part of our world. But in psychology, we know that this is not true. So let us move to decision making. So we have seen the importance of context for perception, how meaning derives from the big picture, from understanding what we have in front of us, and how our brain is filling the gaps for us. We have the same mechanism in decision making. And for instance, let us look at this ad from The Economist. This is a real ad from The Economist. It is mentioned in a book by Dan Ariely, a famous psychologist working at Stanford and MIT. So you have these three offers. You have the online subscription for $59. You have the print subscription from $125, or you could get both, print and web subscription, from $125, which is weird. So which one would you pick? Who picks the first one? 59. Second one, 125. Okay, that's something that you don't want to pick. And the third one, 125. So it's a good deal because, you know, we can pay 125 for the printed journal. We can have, in addition, the web subscription from 125. And when Dan Ariely did the exercise with the MIT students, he found more or less the same market shares. Few people wanted to save money. They really wanted not to spend money. No one wanted the middle option, which is, of course, an inferior option, something that you don't want to pick. Most people wanted the print and web subscription. So, okay, let's say this one is useless then. Let's take it out. And you would have this ad. And then Ariely did the exercise. He gave this ad to another set of MIT students and asked them, okay, what do you want to choose? So these were the previous market shares, and that's what you get. So now people, once you take out the useless option, the one that is in the middle, now people prefer the cheapest one, the one where you just get the print subscription. So the message here is that the useless option is not really useless, it's part of the context. It helps us understand, figure out what we really want. So compared to that useless option, the third one seems like a fantastic deal, like Dan Ariely says in the video that you will see in a bit. Well, this one, okay, no, I don't really want that. If you take that out, then you only have two items to compare, and then price is important. And so you start thinking, do I really need the web subscription? Do I really need the printed version? And at the end of the day, you decide that you want to save your money. The same principle is illustrated in another experiment with physical persons that Dan Ariely ran. It's really the same principle, and we'll let you enjoy the video.
People believe that when we deal with physical attraction, we see somebody and we know immediately whether we like them or not, attracted or not. This is why we have these 4-minute dates. So I decided to do this experiment with people. I'll show you graphic images of people, not real people. The experiment was with people. I showed some people a picture of Tom and a picture of Jerry, and I said, who do you want to date, Tom or Jerry? But for half the people, I added an ugly version of Jerry. I took Photoshop and I made Jerry slightly less attractive. The other people, I added an ugly version of Tom. And the question was, will ugly Jerry and ugly Tom help the respective more attractive brothers? And the answer was absolutely yes. When ugly Jerry was around, Jerry was popular. When ugly Tom was around, Tom was popular. This, of course, has two very clear implications for life in general. If you ever go bar hopping, who do you want to take with you? You want a slightly uglier version of yourself. Similar, but slightly uglier. And the second point, of course, is that if somebody else invites you, you know how they think about you. Now you're getting it.
So let's get to the conclusions, the wrap-up, what we have seen. Three main points. The fact that whenever we are trying to understand what we have in front of us, we have this effort. Our brain tries to see the forest before the trees. Our brain tries to understand the big picture, and from that we give meaning to the single elements. We turn fragments into details of the big picture. The second key point is that perception is an active process. We see perception as something passive. We are here, reality is in front of us, we take in information, but this is not at all what really happens. Behind the scenes, in the background of our brain, there is a lot of happening. Our brain is constantly trying to understand what we have in front of us, is constantly making decisions. And these decisions happen at the perceptual level, but of course they also happen whenever we really need to make a decision. So the same mechanisms that are behind the normal things that we do in everyday life are still there whenever we use the superior part, our superior cognitive function, so the things that we see as purely human, as the hallmark of being human. So these are the three main points. So any question? Any comment?
I have a question. So you talked about the importance of context for decision making, and I can see how that could lead to some advantages and as well as disadvantages. Could you give us some practical examples of some of the benefits and risks that could be associated with having that ability to kind of see the forest in front of the trees?
The benefit is something we experience in everyday life. We are quick. So as we assume that we know the context and the context is stable, we know what to do. So for instance, if you have experts doing their job and there is something to decide, they know what they're doing and they are able to jump to conclusions. They don't have to do all the individual steps of the decision-making process to reach a conclusion. The disadvantage is that sometimes the context seems the same, but it is not exactly the same. There are exceptional circumstances, and we are likely to ignore these. We are likely to assume that it's like every day, but it's not like every day. And this is the high-risk situation for safety-critical systems. Whenever we have exceptions, whenever we have extremely rare contextual factors that play a role. In this case, the only mitigation we have is to put in place a structured decision process, using, for instance, processes like the FORDEC or the DODAR, that are acronyms that prescribe different steps of the decision-making process that you have to follow, and you have to check the quality of your decision at each step to make sure that the end decision has a good enough quality. And I would like to finish with another nice image that nicely shows how good our brain is. This is an impossible image, something that we shouldn't be able to see, but again, our brain is so good that we can also see things that are not there. It can also make us see things that don't really exist. This image, if you focus on the details, you see there are problems, but if you focus on the big picture, you can clearly see it. So, thank you, and I leave the floor to Angela for the next part on teamwork.